Good evening, everyone. Yeah, we might as well just talk to each other because, if you all came down closer, we'd feel a little cozier in here, too. But really, you can stay wherever you're comfortable. I'm Dr. Katie Comboy. I'm president of St. Mary's College, and I'm just so pleased to welcome all of you to Raise Your Voice, our annual Sexual Violence Prevention Symposium, and tonight's keynote speaker, Kym Worthy. This event is sponsored by the President's Committee on Sexual Violence, and I'd like to thank the committee for their work and give a special shout out and thanks to Liz Coulston-Bauman, our Title IX officer. Liz just shows extraordinary efforts to bring an evening like this together, and this is our third year for this event, so I appreciate that, and the entire symposium, which I think is finding its place in our ecosystem around this topic as well. We know that the topics that are discussed tonight can be difficult, so please take care of yourself. If you're in need of any kind of additional support, we have trained advocates from the St. Joseph County Family Justice Center available to speak at any time. So you can find them at the back of the auditorium. As I said, this is the third year we've hosted this symposium. I really believe as a Catholic women's college and the only women's college in the state of Indiana, we should unequivocally be the conveners of this type of event. And we should be a leader in furthering discussions about sexual violence, its impact on survivors and our culture, and how we all can play a role in ending sexual violence in our communities. St. Mary's is committed to highlighting voices and stories that belong front and center on this topic. Tonight, we welcome Kym Worthy to share her voice. Worthy is the prosecutor of Wayne County, Michigan, where Detroit is located, and she's the first African-American woman to serve as county prosecutor in the state. She's the subject of the 2019 Emmy Award-winning documentary, I Am Evidence, which chronicles her 10-year mission to process over 11,000 abandoned and unprocessed sexual assault kits. These kits languished in a Detroit police warehouse from 1984 to 2009, and Worthy ensured that every kit was tested, investigated, and that a victim-centered approach was used in each investigation. Thanks to her efforts, state legislation is now in place in Michigan that details the timeline for submission of kits for testing and a statewide tracking system that allows victims to follow their kit's progress for DNA testing. In 2018, she was inducted into the Michigan Women's Hall of Fame for her years of tireless work, and specifically for her outstanding efforts to resolve the Detroit sexual violence backlog. Worthy received her undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan and her law degree from the University of Notre Dame. She has been an adjunct professor in criminal law at the University of Detroit Mercy and has lectured at the law schools of Harvard, Notre Dame, and Wayne State University, among others. I am deeply appreciative to have her on our campus as our symposium keynote speaker, and I know you'll join me in giving a warm welcome to Prosecutor Kym Worthy.
Thank you very much. I am really pleased to be here. As she indicated, I did do my law school years, although none of it was fun, at the University of Notre Dame, and I had relatives here. My uncle, who just passed away sadly, was the first African-American tenured professor at Notre Dame, and that's kind of what lured me here. So I'm pleased to be here, but I'm even more pleased, I can't even tell you, about this whole effort that you're doing in your third year. I knew nothing about it until I was contacted, so I made sure and went and looked up everything about the first 2 years, and I am so happy to be here to share your third. This is a message that we've tried to get out for many, many years, and I cannot tell you how much this is appreciated, and I'm going to be telling everyone when I return here what a great program you have. You know, I'm going to backtrack just a little bit, but before I go any further, I'm going to say I'm not a forensic scientist. I am not a forensic scientist, but I am able to talk about what we've done with forensic genetic genealogy. But before we get there, I want to tell you how we got there. And your president has talked about it a little bit, and I hope one day you will have a couple of spare hours and see I Am Evidence. That is a documentary that was produced by Mariska Hargitay, who is the star of Law and Order SVU, and she's very passionate about this effort, and I'm going to talk a little bit about her later. As was said, these kits were discovered in 2009, and when I first found out about it, I thought only in Detroit. I had no idea that this was a national and international issue because I had no idea that people would stockpile rape kits. Who does that? You would never do that, as I was telling a reporter earlier, with a homicide case or an armed robbery case or even a child abuse case. Take the evidence that you have, throw it in a warehouse, and forget about it for 35 years, now almost 50 years. And so at the time that this happened in 2009, Detroit was 4 years before the largest municipal bankruptcy in the history of the United States. So they had no money. And at that time, it cost, from the 11,341, at that time it was costing $1,200 to $1,500. I know about the PowerPoint, I'll get there. $1,200, I hear people talking, $1,200 to $1,500 per kit to test. Millions of dollars just to test them. But I did know at the very beginning there were 3 things I wanted to do. Number 1, bring some amount of justice to all the women whose lives were represented in those rape kits. Second, I wanted to make sure this never, ever, ever happened again. And thirdly, I wanted to get all the kits tested. I didn't know how we were going to do it. So just very, very briefly, and you'll hear about this in the film if you ever watch it, we just started a campaign, and I went everywhere begging people to fund it, because no one had any money at the time, as I said. And I went to small groups of women who started hosting parties in their backyards, on their lawns, and in their houses, and raising a little bit of money. I went to every nonprofit I could find. I went to the state, I went to the county, and at that time, Obama was the president, and it was really his administration that got things started for us and gave us some money to get started. So it's a very long story, but again, that's how we got started. And then I testified in, I think, 2010 before Congress. And it's just how you imagine it to be. The Congress men and women are facing you. You're sitting at a long table in front of them. And sitting next to me was Mariska Hargitay, and that's how I met her, to speak about her show and how it led her to this work, and also about how she was funding projects across the country, because she also couldn't believe that anybody would just stockpile rape kits. I say that name because she's also the one that really got us started and really got us running. She used her celebrity in this issue to get us going and raising money. So, as was spoken about too, we then passed some legislation in Michigan, and the legislation was basically to make sure there was a tracking system, because we said from the very beginning, if you can order something from Amazon and know the moment that you press pay, the time is going to land on your doorstep within hours or days. You know exactly when it's supposed to get there, and if it's not, you're on the phone or doing whatever you do to find out where it is. And so that is what we said about a rape kit. Certainly if you can do that, then you ought to be able to track a rape kit through the criminal justice system in one state in Michigan. So we did a pilot project, and then I'm going to morph into what I'm here to talk about today. And we used UPS, and we used their scanners. So in Wayne County, where Detroit is the largest city, I have 42 other cities, but Detroit is the largest, we have the benefit of having forensic nurses who do all the testing, the rape kit testing. And that's a great benefit. So we use their scanners whenever someone's tested by the Wayne County forensic nurses. We would scan that particular kit, because every kit has a barcode. When it was picked up by the Detroit Police Department, it was scanned. When it was taken to the lab to be tested, it was scanned. And when it was brought back into police custody, it was scanned again. And so we never lost, this was post the discovery of the rape kits. So it was the rape kits going forward, not the old ones. And so we didn't lose a single kit. We knew where every single kit was for that 16 months that we did that pilot project. We then switched to a web-based system that operated the same way. But we went a step further because I really, really, really wanted to have the victim to be able to see where their rape kit was. So she's given a TOG or a CAD, and he or she, I'm going to say she throughout this presentation, but again, in those rape kits, in that 11,341, we had children as young as, I think 8 was our youngest child that had a rape kit that was done, and we had men that also had rape kits that were being done as well. So again, we didn't lose a rape kit during that period of time, and we went forward, and we were able to do what we did. So we have that tracking system where the victim can look into a porthole and find out exactly, is it still with the forensic nurses? Is it in police custody? Is it at the lab? Has it been tested? And they can look in that portal and get all that information. So again, every police department in the state of Michigan has been trained on this, and so I'm hoping we haven't lost any rape kits at all during this period of time since 2009. So just very, very briefly, I want to go through, in case those of you don't know, although I think this is a very learned crowd, I'm sure, that a rape kit exam is a 4 to 10-hour exam where every orifice of a woman's body or men's or child's body is plucked and prodded. And evidence is taken, what can potentially be evidence, is taken from them: hairs, fibers, anything you can think of, eyelashes, anything you can think of. And the goal is to get enough information in the rape kit where scientists could then examine it and make a genetic profile to enter into CODIS. CODIS is the Combined Index DNA System, and it's a national database where we put things into CODIS. This has become relevant to what I'm talking about in a minute because it was because of that and because of the information we did not have, we started using forensic genealogy. And so last thing I want to mention about this, when we finished well, we're still working on it. We are still doing cases from these rape kits still, and I have the latest stats I want to share with you just in a moment. But again, we want to make sure that we found everybody. We had about 5,000 of these kits where we couldn't find the survivor, couldn't find the victim. And so we did what was called an opt-in campaign. It had never been done in the United States. We basically bought TV time and air time and radio time and billboards because our goal was, if we were going to close out these cases, we wanted to be able to say to ourselves that we had done everything humanely possible to find these survivors before we closed out the case. And so we were able to generate about 50 people who contacted us and were interested in pursuing their cases. So now we had a decision to make. As you will see, and let me see if I can do this right. We talked about that. As you will see from these stats what I'm getting ready to give you, we had a number of serial rapists that were found. And I pretty much know these stats by heart, but we have convicted over 250 rapists since 2009. That may sound like a small number from the 11,341, but it's really not. And they represent a whole lot more women because a lot of these were serial rapists. We have identified over 840 serial rapists that were found in that warehouse. In one city, in one county, in one state. 841 serial rapists. So those serial rapists that we could not identify through CODIS because there are two different kinds of association. One is the scientists have enough genetic material to make a profile and put into CODIS. And it hits on someone that's a named person. We know who it was. We know who it is. So we're able then to go out and arrest that person. We also have what's called case-to-case associations. So you have two separate kits, or 3 or 4 or 5 or however many, they're linked to each other. We know it's the same person, but we don't know who the person is. And that's why we turned to forensic genetic genealogy. So we were able to identify 21 total kits representing 16 serial rapists. You want to know how many victims that represented? 91. 91 victims were raped by 16 separate serial rapists out of 21 sexual assault kits. And I should tell you that each offender, on average, of all of our kits that was a serial rapist averaged 5 sexual assaults in the city of Detroit. Now, we know that rape is much more prevalent because not all women report, and certainly not all women have rape kits done. And sometimes women have rape kits done. This is something I did not know before we started this all these years ago. Some women have rape kits done not to turn over to law enforcement because they want to know if they're pregnant or they want to know if they have a sexually transmitted disease. So there are many reasons why women have rape kits. How did forensic genetic genealogy help us identify serial rapists? Forensic genetic genealogy is an investigative tool used to provide and enhance leads. We have forensic genealogy work that's being done, I'll explain that in a minute, and we add that along with traditional investigative techniques like interviewing, photo lineups, collecting discarded DNA samples, search warrants for a buccal swab. A buccal swab is a Q-tip looking, it is a Q-tip basically, where they swab the inside of a suspect's mouth. And in Michigan, I don't know about Indiana, in Michigan, every person that's ever arrested has to have a swab done. And every person that is in the Michigan Department of Corrections has to have swabs done, and them all entered into CODIS, because the more profiles we have in CODIS, the easier it would be for us then to solve crimes, of course. And we have to do a search warrant for these buccal swabs. The buccal swabs is then taken by a search warrant or discarded DNA, and a comparison is done to determine who the suspect in fact is. So we sent our submissions, because we received, after all these years, we received quite a bit of grant money to run our rape kit project. And with that grant money, we decided to then entertain FGG, or forensic genetic genealogy. It's very, very expensive. And we talked to almost all the companies that were in existence at that time, and we chose Parabon Nanolabs to do our work. So we started doing that in 2019, and also we utilized the FBI genetic genealogy unit as well. As I said, 91 victims, 21 kits that we submitted to Parabon, and 16 serial offenders, but we just didn't know who they were. What is it? It's law enforcement's use of DNA analysis combined with traditional genealogy research to generate investigative leads for unsolved crimes. And I'm sure most of you have heard of the most famous case where forensic genealogy was used. And I've got to look up his name because I can't remember what it is. Joseph James D'Angelo. And how many of you heard about the Golden State Killer? That was the first documented case where forensic genetic genealogy was used. This was a person who was a former police officer, a former mechanic. He committed at least 13 murders, 51 rapes, and 120 burglaries, one person. The moniker was given the Golden State Killer, and the cases went unsolved for decades, even when traditional DNA techniques were used. Finally, he was charged on April 24th of 2018. There was a lot of secrecy. There was a press conference done, I believe, by the Santa Barbara DA, I believe. And there was a lot of secrecy. They didn't say at first how they were able to arrest this man that had been eluding them for decades and decades. We later found out that it was through forensic genealogy that they used. And he was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder and multiple counts of kidnapping and abduction. They couldn't try him for any of the sexual assaults because the statute of limitations has run. So again, it's a form of DNA analysis using hundreds of thousands of genetic markers, like genetic traits, like diseases, eye and hair color, etc. It uses thousands of genetic markers versus the 20 markers that are generally used for DNA in our CODIS database. So you can see why we wanted to turn to an area of forensic genealogy, because we had then access to thousands and thousands of genetic markers when we only had 20 before. Now, I'm sure most of you recognize Ancestry DNA and also 23andMe. These are some of the companies who do this analysis. And the field of genetic genealogy started by helping people, some of you maybe have used it, learn about their heritage and family trees. Now genetic testing companies like 23andMe and Ancestry.com use DNA testing to provide users with information about their family tree and history. Now, these are what we call direct-to-consumer databases. In other words, if you send your DNA off to 23andMe or Ancestry.com, they will send you back directly. You own it, the results. And they do not send it to law enforcement. So they're called direct-to-consumer, or DTC. Individuals, like I said, own their own DNA profiles and can only be accessed by law enforcement if then uploaded to companies like Family Tree DNA and GED Match. So again, you send your information off to Ancestry.com, they send it back to you. Law enforcement cannot access those results. But if you then upload it to a public database, because you want to have access to many more people and many more profiles, then law enforcement can, in fact, access that. So GED Match is a free DNA comparison and analysis website for people who have tested their own DNA using the direct-to-consumer, again, like 23andMe and Ancestry.com and others. These databases are accessible, like I said, to law enforcement, because this database, once people all over the world start uploading their results they receive from their direct information, this allows individuals tested at different DTC, direct-to-consumer, Ancestry DNA, 23andMe, companies to upload their DNA profile. And the reason why they do that is because they want to compare it with individuals that are tested elsewhere. So it gives their DNA result basically access to all these thousands of other people who have uploaded to a public company. So Family Tree DNA also allows their consumers to opt in or out. In other words, when you upload it to this public database, Family Tree anyway, not all of them, but Family Tree allows you to say, no, I don't want law enforcement to have access to it, or yes, I do want law enforcement to have access to it. So Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, and others, again, do not allow direct access to their database. Orthram, who's a new company, is now developing new DNA storage databases where individuals tested can decide to upload their DNA to the databases for law enforcement use. I always tell people there's no reason that anybody should think that law enforcement can have access to it, but again, what we can find out, you'll find out in a minute. So forensic genetic genealogy utilizes traditional genealogy records and documents within the DNA technology. Now also, these DNA companies do searches just like you or me would do. Before we had these companies like 23andMe, you go to birth records, death records, to your city clerk's office, you would look all over social media, try to find out all the information you can. So we still do that. We still do that in addition to that, and that helps, and so do the companies. Parabon does it too. They actually research everything, and that helps us get to the person that did it. Relatives can be identified through this process. It's a very long process. I'll talk about Lionel Wells in a minute. He was our first case that we were able to identify that we never would have found except for FGG. Then they take the results they get from Parabon and they do old-fashioned gumshoe detective work to lead to a possible suspect from the relatives. And in Lionel Wells' case, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, as I said, Parabon identified 5 cousins. That the rapist was one of those 5 cousins. And so we had to figure out how to eliminate the other 4. They even found the DNA in Lionel Wells' family from down south, and they were able to look at records and plane records and figure out that those relatives that were identified down south were not in Detroit at the time when these rapes occurred. So it's a very, very wide global approach they take. So again, we get these profiles. We had 5 in this first case that we had. They then would work the case to try to figure out via buccal swabs who of the 5 was the rapist. Crime scene DNA is uploaded, like if there's a semen or something found on bed sheets or on a bathrobe or a nightgown or on the victim herself or himself, then that's all uploaded into the CODIS. If there's no CODIS match, that's why we turn to forensic genealogy. So we have crime scene DNA, we have the CODIS system. If there's a match, then investigators go out and arrest the person. If there's not a match, other crime scene evidence is uploaded into CODIS. Genetic genealogy is performed, and that leads hopefully to a suspect. So again, not to be too repetitive, but I was repetitive by design in some of this to make it easier to understand. Genetic genealogy allows investigators to find suspects beyond your regular law enforcement databases. With genealogy websites, and this is a little scary, I think, for some people, I don't know why it should be, with genealogy websites, even if an individual does not submit their DNA to these public websites, all it takes is a distant relative using this website to upload their information, and they can link you to it, or someone unknown to the suspect to spark a match for further investigation. C.C. Moore, who's the president of who is Parabon's chief genetic genealogist, in 2022 and pioneer in the field, said that genetic genealogy is about using DNA to learn more about a person's family history and genetic heritage. That the type of DNA analysis they do is different from what law enforcement does. And again, I'm not going to go through all that. But that means we have to go back to the original, they have to go back to the original biological evidence and reanalyze it from scratch and using a more advanced technology as I've already described to you. So instead of looking at just a handful of genetic markers, which is what traditionally has been used by law enforcement, they look at 1 million genetic markers that they can get access to. So we have 3 cases where we have solved so far using genetic genealogy. And as I said, we have 13 more that we're waiting on the results. Lionel Wells in 2002, Terrence Calhoun in 2022, in his case has a little twist, and Charles Chrisman in 2023. Lionel Wells, as I've said, was the first one where we utilized forensic genetic genealogy through Parabon. He sexually assaulted at least 6 women over a 7-year period, and all of those women, well, they're not really women, they were girls, were under the age of 15. He pled guilty after he saw all the evidence to him. None of these have gone to trial when we use forensic genetic genealogy. There's nowhere for a defense attorney to really go. And so we haven't had any trials because they've all pled guilty. He pled guilty to 5 sexual assaults, and he was sentenced to 25 to 50 years in prison. These are just a list of his victims. One was 13, one was 17, oh, a little older than 15, 19, and another 17-year-old. The interesting thing about Terrence Calhoun, who was our second case that we utilized forensic genealogy, was that, and he's the one in the middle, he is actually walking out of prison because forensic genetic genealogy exonerated him. He was convicted of a sexual assault. He did 15 years in prison for a crime that he did not commit. Guess who committed it? Lionel Wells. So I said from the very beginning when we started doing this work that not only is this going to help bring justice to all of our women that were sexually assaulted and their lives just thrown away like trash into this warehouse where these rape kits were stockpiled, we're going to find a few cases here and there where we have the wrong person in prison. And that's exactly what we did with Terrence Calhoun. And it was shocking to us that the one case, the first case that we had used forensic genetic genealogy, was done by the person where Terrence Calhoun served time for. Completely exonerated. He was surrounded by family and friends as he left the prison on April 27, 2002, almost exactly 2 years ago. He was exonerated of the sexual assault and kidnapping of a 13-year-old girl after serving 15 years. I said the decision in this case was a culmination of years of long work. It was, on this and unrelated cases. And that's something I said. I had to be very cagey at that time in my description to the press because we were still, Lionel Wells still had not pled guilty at that time, so I really couldn't say too much. This is our third case that we have completed using forensic genetic genealogy. Charles Howard Chrisman, 5 victims, we charged 2 cases. The other 3 cases, the survivor did not want to go forward. And that's kind of a common thread through all of this. We never, when we approached all of our survivors originally, we don't make them. If they didn't want to proceed, we don't make them. That's their decision, and we don't force them, as some jurisdictions do, force them to go forward. We do not do that. That we think that's victimizing them again. And I should say that when we first started this process in 2009, we spent 9 months, almost a year, developing our victim notification policy because we were so concerned about approaching women that had been sexually assaulted 30 years ago, 35 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and approaching them. We had a number of our survivors that did choose to go forward who had been sex workers at the time. They had been addicted to alcohol and drugs, and they had a new life, had completely turned their lives around, and perhaps married and had children. And we did not want to just approach their houses like gangbusters and tell them everything that we knew about them. We didn't want to do it that way. That would be destructive in our opinion. So we spent 9 months doing this victim notification policy along with Joyful Heart, again, Mariska's Foundation, of which I am now the vice chair. And we got together and we again, 9 months, trying to figure out the best way. We consulted experts. And we decided on this approach. We would send a detective to the door or meet them wherever they wanted to meet and let them know that we had information on a case that had happened to them years ago. And that's all we would say. We would love to come back if you allow us to and talk to you about it further. We realize you may not want to talk about it now, but we'd like to give you some time to think about whether you want to go forward with this. And that's what we would do. And then we'd come back a second time and bring a victim advocate and someone that was well-versed in helping victims and survivors of sexual assault. And so, again, it was not unusual, although I must say most of our survivors wanted to go forward. Some of them did not, and in this case was a good example of that because we had 5 victims, 5 sexual assaults, and 2 cases that were charged. So again, this kit had been analyzed by the Michigan State Police lab. The kit placed in CODIS, and there was a case-to-case association with 4 other cases, 5 cases altogether. We didn't know who it was. The DNA profiles were submitted to Parabon for genetic genealogy, and on December 1st, 2021, 2 potential suspects were ID'd using this genealogy. In the Lionel Wells case, it was 5 cousins. In this case, there were 2 suspects. It led to search warrants that we did and signed by a judge and a confirmed buccal swab that led us to the defendant once he was arrested. These are a list of his victims, age 33, age 20, age 36, age 24, age 35, on different dates from, looks like 2014, or 2012 to 2019. We charged him in 2 cases. He also pled guilty to 2 counts of criminal sexual conduct, that is Michigan's sexual assault statute, first degree, for 2 separate rape kit cases. And he was sentenced to 15 to 25 years. And the next couple of slides are just a list of cases. I talked about the 21 cases with 16 serial rapists, or do I have it backwards? And these are a list of these cases. Unknown number 2, 7 victims, all were similar because weapons were used, and this was from 1996 to 2004 on down. Unknown 15 was one that we said, and that was the Charles Chrisman case that I just talked about. 5 victims, 3 with weapons, from 1996 to 2002. He ran rapid and raping women across the city of Detroit. And these are others. Unknown 58, I'm not going to read them all. 5 victims, all weapons used, 1998 through 2001. The youngest victim was 11 years old. His victims were 11 years old, 13 years old, 14 years old, and 16 years old. Unknown 69, 4 victims, all weapons. Unknown 87, 4 victims, 1 weapon, and on and on and on. A 12-year-old victim and unknown 93, and that happened in 2000. This is more. Unknown 156 turned out to be the Lionel Wells case that we submitted to Parabon, and we're still waiting for the results in these other cases. 7 victims, 1 defendant, 1 potential defendant, we don't know who it is. We know what his DNA is. 3 weapons, 3 with weapons, and his was a span from 2009 to 2019. So our update, we're looking at 2 cases where we should be able to charge very soon. In one, the investigation developed probable cause for a search warrant. The judge signed the search warrant on February 22nd of 2024, and our investigators are looking for the suspect because we now know who it is. And that was unknown number 2 on our list above. Unknown 183 I mentioned, and again, same thing. We now know who the rapist is. The search warrant was signed by a judge, and my investigators are actively looking for the suspect. So we know who the suspect is in these 2 cases. Of the 11,341 kits tested, 1,069 are cases with DNA that are CODIS eligible, and we entered into the database. One case that we don't know who it is yet, but we have submitted to Parabon, was an awful, not that all these cases aren't awful, but this was a particularly egregious sexual assault on a 12-year-old girl that was simply sleeping in her home during the summer, so the window was propped open in her bed. And she was viciously, and I mean viciously, it's one of the worst I've seen, raped. And so that's one that we're waiting on that we've submitted. Parabon continues to this day to monitor databases as information is uploaded from direct-to-consumer genealogy kits. So we just continue this work. Again, we started right when we discovered these kits in 2009, identifying people and getting kits tested slowly but surely. We finally got them all tested, I believe it was about 6 years ago. And so we continue this work with genetic genealogy to try to find closure to even more of our survivors. But again, it's a very long process and a very expensive process. For survivors of sexual assault and for those wrongfully convicted, it's never, 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 never too late for justice. I thank you so very much.
Hi everyone, my name is Lucia Hatzel. I'm a senior here at St. Mary's College and I'm a cell molecular biology major. I'm also a student representative of the President's Committee on Sexual Violence.
Hi, my name is Caitlin Sizemore, and I'm a junior speech-language pathology, gender and women's studies double major, and I'm also a student representative on the President's Committee on Sexual Violence. So as we begin our Q&A, please remember to text your questions for Kym using the number printed on your pamphlet. So our first question is, as a county prosecutor, you see many crimes. What made you passionate about this work specifically?
You know, I was sexually assaulted on the Notre Dame campus my first year of law school. And I would like to think that that had nothing to do with my passion now, but it probably did, because I don't know how all events begin to affect you. And for me, it was just the outrageousness of it all. How could they do that to people? How could they just forget about them? How could they not care? When we first started our work and we began gathering files, because there was no digital system, so we had to literally go through police records and find through 11,000 of them and try to get information. And when we opened up some of these reports, they would say things like, where the police officer would write it down, we don't believe her. If she was really raped in a field, she would be dirtier. Or if she was really raped, then she wouldn't be laughing right now. Or she would have more animation. But there is no one way that a sexual assault victim acts. And some will have a flat affect, some will be laughing, and that's one of the things that we have made sure to train our police officers in Detroit on that kind of thing. So not everybody reacts to trauma in any certain way, but the biggest thing is, what we've tried to do more than anything is at least start by believing the person that comes in here and reports it, because so many women don't report, as I said before. Let's start by, and that's because of the way, and the rape culture and the way that they're treated. The neurobiology of trauma is what I was trying to say earlier. We train our police officers on that. And so when someone walks into the police department and they are relating what happened to them in the most intimate of ways, that they were sexually assaulted without their consent, then at least you should believe them and start by being. And as I said earlier, you don't disbelieve a domestic violence, well, I guess they do disbelieve domestic violence victims actually, but robbery victims and things like that. If you walked in and said my car was stolen, they say, well, I don't believe you. That doesn't happen, but it happens in sexual assault.
Thank you for sharing your story.
So the second question we have for you is, some of these survivors have waited decades for justice. How have they felt when the perpetrators are finally convicted?
There's a number of reactions, as you can imagine. I'm fortunate to be able to say that most of our trials have ended up in guilty pleas, but also the ones that went to trial have ended up in convictions. But we have had some that were not guilty cases. And to the letter, these women, after we talk to them, after the verdict has been not guilty, they say to us, well, at least someone believed me. I felt heard. I felt seen. And even though we didn't get the result that I wanted, I felt validated that you believed what happened to us, to me, and when I say us, the women. And so that has been not bitterness, not remorse. It's been truly shocking that they are so happy that someone at least saw them and heard them, that they were disappointed in the verdict, but at least they were believed.
Kind of a follow-up question on that one. I know you mentioned when you take your second visit to a victim or survivor's house, or wherever they decide to meet, you bring a victim advocate. What other supports do you provide victims or survivors, however they identify, after you open up that process? You know,
Wayne County is one of the most diverse counties in the country, outside of New York and LA. So we have a number of resources to direct people to. And even now, when we're doing domestic violence, child abuse, or not so much child abuse, but domestic violence and sexual assault, if they don't want to go forward, then we want to make sure they get services. And most of them do accept the services, even though they don't want to go through and prosecute their perpetrators. So we have Arab American, Jewish, we have African American, we have Latina, we have LGBTQ victim services and organizations that we can send people to. So we have a plethora of resources that we can send people to. So, and then we have the forensic nurses who also do counseling and everything else. We even have a service that works with men, not men that have done the assaults, but men who we work with to make sure that they don't become assaulters themselves, and young boys that we work with as well. So we have a well-rounded approach, but we really want to make sure that people get the services that they need and help with the services that they need.
Another follow-up question with that. What resources are provided to the survivors?
Well, the resources that I mentioned, and we don't have as much monetary resources I would like to have, but again, we have victim advocates that are in my office, so they are walked through with the victim advocate after every single court appearance. We try to prepare them what it's like to go to court. So we have our office-based advocates. We also have canine advocates that work with our survivors of sexual assault. And we also have community-based advocates, and those were the ones I mentioned before.
The next question is actually very interesting. Is AI currently being utilized in forensic genealogy?
Not that I know of, but probably so, because AI is everywhere. That's the next bastion of things that we're going to have to work with. I mean, we have cases now that are occurring not in my jurisdiction, so that I know of yet, in surrounding jurisdictions where the head of a girl is being placed on the naked body of another girl or woman, and then they have to face and go to school. We've had suicides that have occurred, et cetera. And so, no, we have not seen anything like that yet, but I am sure it's going to happen. I'm not sure how, and maybe I just don't know, AI is related to forensic genetic genealogy, but it probably is. But again, we are going to have some real challenges ahead with AI. It's a good thing, but it's also a not so good thing.
Our next question is, why is the logging system of rape kits not a national program?
I'm sorry, repeat that.
Why is the logging system of rape kits not a national program?
Not an actual, I don't understand your question, I'm sorry.
It might be in reference to CODIS.
Okay. The login system that we have, are you talking about the tracking system?
The logging?
Loggate? I'm sorry, it's all me. I'm sure I'm the one that just doesn't understand the question.
The logging system.
Login system, I don't know what you...
So is CODIS a national system?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. You have state-based CODIS systems also, but the CODIS system that I'm referring to is a nationwide system.
Are the state and national systems combined at all, or are those completely separate databases?
You know, I think they're separate databases.
Okay, our next question for you is, do you know what the backlog of rape kits looks like specifically in Indiana?
I don't know what it looks like in Indiana. I know it looks like in Michigan, but I can tell you one stat that I didn't give you earlier was that the test results from the 11,341 rape kits are loaded into the national database. And there were 39 other states besides Michigan that we had hits in. And yes, one of them is Indiana. So, and we sent it off, I don't know, I can't tell you where in Indiana right now or whether they followed through on it. That's an interesting question I think that a reporter might be interested in. But certainly, Indiana was one of the 40 states that was impacted by our testing that we put into CODIS. And just as an aside, the case here in Indiana may not be a sexual assault case because the DNA system helps us solve murders and sexual assaults and B&Es and auto theft, every type of crime. So the more you have that populate that system, the easier it is for law enforcement to solve crimes. So I don't know how many of our kits tested pointed to the state of Indiana, but I do know that Indiana was one of the 40 states that was impacted. So there are only 10 states in the United States of America that were not impacted by the rape kits that were found in Detroit, one city, one county, one state. So I don't know if I said this earlier, but when I first found out about this, and I thought only in Detroit, I think I did say this earlier, we found out it was a national problem. And people had these cases all over the United States, impacted rape kits that had been in some jurisdictions just decided they were going to just destroy the kits. They weren't going to do anything with them. Some jurisdictions tested the kits and didn't prosecute any of them. So national issue. And I'm sure it's been an issue here in Indiana, although I don't know what the results are. But very interesting story to know about.
Our next question is, could you describe the process of getting involved with the documentary I Am Evidence?
Yes, I think I said earlier that I met Mariska when I was testifying before Congress. And I literally, as they were trying to whisk her out, I literally pulled on her jacket. She says that's not what happened, but that's what happened. And so, and I said, would you please come to Detroit? At that time, we weren't getting very much traction. Would you please come to Detroit and help us with this? And she said, sure. And I thought, oh yeah, right. And she did. She had her people contact me very soon. She came to Detroit to help us with the issue, to help us raise money, and also to talk to legislators, because I had been on the phone with legislators to change the law. They didn't call me back, but when she came, they all came. And she took pictures with all of them. And really, it was smooth sailing after that. The legislation passed very, very quickly. So I'm not sure I answered your question, but that's what started it all. What was the rest of your question? I can hear you. So after that, I started working with Mariska, and she flew me to New York several times and for me to speak and talk about what we were doing, because again, she was very, very passionate about this. And she used to have yearly galas about this, and she approached me and she said she wanted to make a movie. She decided to make a movie on the rape kit issue to bring awareness. And I was shocked and I was floored, and I was a big part of the movie. They came to Detroit several times to film me. She came once again to be part of that filming. And it came out, it was sponsored by HBO. I think it's still on HBO today. It's called I Am Evidence. And it actually won the Emmy that year for Best Documentary.
Kind of going off of that, a little bit away from the movies, how did you find the warehouse in Detroit that had the untested kits?
That is a very good question. We had several other scandals in Detroit before this one. Not gonna lie. And that's why when I had that reaction when we found the kits, it was, okay, why Detroit? And one of those scandals is we prosecuted the mayor and sent him to prison, a very popular mayor. And this was within a period of about 14 months. We had another scandal with the testing of firearms in shooting and homicide cases. We had detectives that were at that time, the police department they were the experts in firearms identification, and we found out that a number of their results were flawed. So we had to start looking at all of that. When that happened, and this is why certain people don't like me, when that happened, I said, okay, we have to have a whole analysis of what's in the Detroit crime lab, because at that time, Detroit had their own lab, and they were very proud of that lab. And when I said to the chief at that time, we have to look at every area of forensics in that lab, because you can't tell me that once that's what's discovered, that the firearms examinations are the only area of forensics that are affected. So the state police came and they did an audit, and they discovered that there were many, many areas, and then I recommended to the then mayor, after the mayor we prosecuted was gone, that they close the crime lab, and they did. As a result of that, the Michigan State Police took over all the evidence they have a crime lab, as every state has a main crime lab, took over all the evidence and forensics out of the Detroit crime lab. The first thing that they did is they wanted to do an audit of everywhere in the Detroit Police Department that they stored evidence, all the property room. We thought, and I've been doing this for a long time, there's only one property room. But we found out later that the DPD took them to all the areas that they stored evidence, and that's one of them was the warehouse where the rape kits were discovered. I sent one of my managers with the team that went to do the inventory because I wanted to know what went on firsthand. And after they looked at that warehouse, and this was someone that was trained in child abuse, sexual assault, and he immediately saw the kits in the warehouse, birds and everything else flying around, unsecured. But the one thing that helped us is that he noticed that the boxes, the seal, had not been broken on any of the rape kits, so they hadn't been disturbed. So that's how we found out. He came into my office after, and he said, "Boss, you're not going to believe this. There are at least 10,000 rape kits in this." And I was like, this is all we need. I said some not nice, I'm not a cursor, but I said some not nice words. I could not believe it. I could not believe it. And that's how we found out.
Thank you for taking the time to do a full-scale analysis.
Very welcome.
Going off of that, why does the backlog even exist? What prevented the kits from being tested immediately?
One of the things that we did is when we worked with the National Institute of Justice after the Obama White House got involved, is when we received money from the Office of Violence Against Women, they wanted us to do a study, and we wanted to do a study. And so Dr. Rebecca Campbell, who is at Michigan State University, is an expert in sexual assault in this area. She's also a researcher. And so she researched this issue for a long time. We wanted to get to the whys. Of course, when I first found out about it, I want to say, okay, we're going to prosecute all the people that are responsible, we're going to go, but that wasn't going to bring justice to any of our victims, and I was going to waste time doing that when what we really needed to do was get to getting help for these victims, our survivors. And so that's how that got started. And we found out there were several things. I've been the elected, we say DA here, I think, but the elected prosecutor for going on 20 years now. Before that, I was a judge, and before that, I was an assistant prosecutor who did homicide cases. And we knew that there would be several issues. And so that's how we got started, by that way.
Another question, a little bit more about the process of testing. How long does it take to take a rape kit to be tested and processed? So what's the timeline look like?
Let me go back to you, because I don't think I answered your question enough. We found out that some of the reasons were there had been 9 changes of leadership. The kits went back 35 years when we first discovered there had been 9 changes of leadership. Each police chief had a different agenda. The biggest reason was rape culture that we talked about earlier. They didn't care about these cases. They didn't care about these women. And the lack of training. Because like I was saying before, when we looked at some of these old reports, they felt free to call them whores and bees for having the temerity, in their opinion, to come in and report a rape. And so, because those were a lot of the reasons, a lack of resources, a lack of money, a lack of believing victims, the changes in leadership and all of that kind of led to it. Now, if you just ask your question again.
The next question is, how long does it take a kit to be tested and processed? So what's the timeline?
That varies. I don't know the exact timeline. I know that after a woman goes through a rape kit, it's fairly quickly. I can't tell you whether it's a matter of days or weeks, but they become available to law enforcement for those victims that want to release them to law enforcement. Not all rape kits that are done are released to law enforcement. If you are sexually assaulted and you don't want law enforcement to have your kit, then we don't make them take it. They can't. But we keep that kit for a year, because oftentimes what survivors will do is during that year period, they'll change their minds. And then, so we keep them for that year, but oftentimes they don't. So.
And to clarify, did you say that your initial contact with the victims of an old rape kit were always first approached in person, or was it via email or mail?
In person.
In person.
Yep. Always in person.
Another question about the notification. How did you handle notifying survivors who were children at the time of the abuse? Was the protocol different for this notification?
For the victim, I'm sorry, the victim notification profile different for whom?
So if the victim was a child, was the notification process different?
It was pretty much the same, but we obviously talked to the adult parent first. In fact, the very first case that we did was a 10-year-old boy. And we approached the mother. We approached the mother, and the boy was now in his 20s. And he had just had a little son himself. So that's what made him go forward. He said he didn't want this to happen to his son, what happened to him. And in that case, very sad, he was like 6 years old at the time. He had gone to his local gas station and was approaching people to make money. Can I pump your gas? That kind of thing. And a man walked up to him and said, I don't have a car, I don't have any gas to pump, but I live right there, and I have some chores that you can do in my house. And of course, you can get an idea what happened. He went to the house, he was ligature, and he was choked, and he was sexually assaulted for hours. And the only reason that the perpetrator let him go was because he had to go and pick up his girlfriend's 5-year-old girl child from school. So even sadder about this case, and that's why I'm glad you asked about a child, even sadder about this case is he immediately told his mother. And his mother went to the police, and the police didn't believe him and didn't do anything. About 6 months later, he told a teacher in school. The teacher reported right away. Again, the police didn't do anything with the case. And this child, when it first happened, had ligature marks around his neck and his hands. And you may ask, well, why wasn't she more persistent? And the question I get a lot is that why people aren't more, if it was me and I was sexually assaulted or my child was sexually, I would be in that police department every day knocking on doors about why nothing has gone to the case. But you have to remember, a lot of these women being sexually assaulted wasn't even the worst thing that happened to them that day. So finally, when we got the case, we contacted the mother. The mother told us the story about how she had tried to report this twice, and that was our first conviction. It was all because the dad said, like he's now in his 20s, I don't want this to happen to my son ever, and I want to make sure the person who raped me as a child and harmed me as a child was brought to justice, and he wasn't. He's in prison now for a very long time. So we do it the same way, except for obviously we contact the parent first.
What advice would you give to someone who is in the early stages of coming forward with their story when the end in prosecution seems so far away?
Oh, wow. It's difficult, especially with the pandemic now. We have some sexual assault survivors who have waited years because of the pandemic to have their case heard. In Wayne County, before the pandemic, we would get to a case within 90 days, so we really didn't have that issue. We were able to say, because of the way our system is set up and the way that we work, we were able to say, we can't guarantee anything. But because of forensics, which hold up a lot of cases, had already been done. So we were able to tell them, we can get through your case, in 3 months or 4 months. And so that really wasn't an issue. Now, it's really up to our victim advocates to keep in touch with them at every bend and turn. And we find that most of them still want to go forward. What we also find for those women who do not want to go forward, or the women whose cases were banned for us going forward because of the statute of limitations, because too much time had passed, we can still use their testimony in other ways. So if the women that didn't want to go forward, or the women whose cases were banned by the statute of limitations, if it's a serial rapist, and one of the cases we want to go forward, we can use their testimony if a judge allows us to prosecute the cases, even though nothing can happen in those cases. So we find the band of women, when a woman finds out that someone else was also sexually assaulted by their same perpetrator, sometimes that draws them in as well. So that kind of enhances and lengthens the timeline, but then they have that sisterhood support, along with the support that we try to give as well.
Another question about the support offered. For the survivors who did not take any of the resources offered initially when you go and visit them, is there any follow-up that's done with them at a later date?
I'd have to say, I don't think so. I know that what we do, in fact, I know that's not true. We do it now. We actively and aggressively try to get our survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault who don't want to go forward to get them services. We are very, very aggressive. We have not done that with our other sexual assault survivors that were part of the rape kits, but we have tried to let them know what the services are. We haven't gone back because we feel if we go back again after they've told us they didn't want to, that, and there are new ways that we can help them, we don't do that. We don't disturb them at all anymore. Now, what we found, some will reach out to us if they're triggered, or if they have changed their minds, or even if they haven't changed their minds, we have advertised very well when we did our opt-in campaign that I talked about before, and some of them were the ones that had come forward before and didn't want to do anything, and still didn't, but wanted the services that we provided. Because when we did our opt-in line, we made sure that we had all of our support on board with us. And so if they still didn't want to go forward, but they wanted to know what happened with their rape kit, they could still get services.
So this will be our last question. So St. Mary's has been actively working to educate our campus and the region about sexual violence. So are there any other things you think a women's college like St. Mary's can do to provide leadership in this area?
Wow, you are doing such a phenomenal job at the college level, I have to say. And the programming, and I was particularly interested in what were you wearing, because that's something that we talk about all the time. And that's something that jurors and other people hold, they hang their hat on that. That if you're wearing something that they deem is stereotypically, inappropriate, that somehow you invited yourself to be sexually assaulted. And we say all the time that, well, if you're walking down the street at night and you're wearing expensive jewelry, you're not asking to be robbed. So you're not asking to be sexually assaulted no matter what you have on. So you've had such good, I was very intrigued with some of the topics from last year, and this year they were equally as good. So beyond that, I think maybe volunteering at some of these shelters. A lot of our domestic violence victims are also victims of sexual assault, sometimes by their partners and their husbands and interfamiliar. And just continue to spread the word. Watch I Am Evidence. I think that will give you a lot of ways that you can help. I hope that this spurred some of you to find a career, either as a DA or a prosecutor or someone in law enforcement or a forensic nurse or doctor or a counselor or someone, a victim advocate. So hopefully some of this will spur some of you to choose that as a career. But keep having this, and education is the key. Educating others like you're doing all the time, all day, every day about sexual assault and the services that are provided. And you're not alone, and you deserve to be believed, and there are people out here that will help you. One of the things that I'm very proud of is that one of the things we wanted to do is change the culture of sexual assault and let people know that at least in Wayne County, I can't do anything about other counties, but at least in Wayne County, if you're sexually assaulted, despite the travesty of 11,000 of you not being believed, now we're serious. And now we will believe you, and now we will move heaven and earth to try to get you services and try to get you help and help get your perpetrator found responsible. And the last thing I would mention is challenge your legislators. Find out what's going on. Find out what police departments in Indiana have untested rape kits, because there will be some, I guarantee you. Find out what they're doing with them. Find out about the cases in Indiana that were carried on by the research that we did and by the testing that we did. So reach out to your legislators. Let them know how you want the laws changed to help victims of sexual assault. So there's plenty of women, plenty of things to do, especially young women that are active and already engaged going forward.
I'd like you all to thank Kym Worthy with me again for sharing her past hour with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I feel bad about not understanding that one question, so it's all on me, but it's my pleasure to be here. Those of us who are in the trenches doing this every day, we survive and we get inspired by situations like this when there are other people out there. Because sometimes we feel it's just us trying to do this work, and we know that's not true, but sometimes that's how it feels. And you've invigorated me, and every time you do this, you've invigorated people, and thank you so much for doing what you have done on this issue.
And please be sure to visit the resource tables in the lobbies and enjoy an elephant ear outside.
Another very quick note. Thank you again for participating in this event. We are going to have this event again next year on April 14th, 2025. So if you want to pull out your calendars and mark that down, I would highly recommend it.